What if your dad was a rock musician? Would that be cool? Something you mention when you and your friends are talking about music in high school? Or would you cringe a little when you went to a festival and saw people dancing to the songs he and his bandmates were playing? Fortunately, Kyle Tupper thought it was pretty cool that his dad played in a band when he was young. Cool enough that music became an instrumental part of his life, too. Kyle, who grew up in Canton, became a musician and is now pursuing it as a career in Nashville. Plus, he never stopped thinking about the music his dad played as a decade-long member of the band Double Axle. Today on Northwards, we'll hear the story of Kyle's latest single, a cover of a song first recorded in a North Country barn decades ago. Plus, a look back at a historic canoe trip and a chat with an Olympic figure skating medalist now coaching North Country skaters. Northwards is next from the studios of North Country Public Radio. This is Northwards, the monthly interview show coming to you from North Country Public Radio. I'm Mitch Tyke. When I was in college, I had to give a speech for a speech class about having an adventure. So a friend and I decided to do a 3-day canoe trip down the Wapsipinicon River in eastern Iowa from Calamus to where it reaches the Mississippi near his home in the Quad Cities. I don't know exactly how long that trip was because, as I recall, our trip was a little low on planning and a little heavy on rain. And we made it to the first night and camped on the edge of a farm field with no prospects for a campfire. And by noon the next day, we pulled the canoe over to the side of the river at a bridge, hiked to a nearby store, and called my friend's father from a payphone to come pick us up, and that was the end of the adventure. Writer Peter Lowry had a canoe adventure around the same year, actually, on a different river, the Hudson. And it was successful enough that it spawned a book called River of Mountains. The book's 30th anniversary edition is just coming out, and Peter Lowry joined me to explain how it has influenced his career in the years since.
I think of all my adventures, and I have 26 books, and most of them are kids' books, but many of them focus on adventures in Latin America and various places. And out of all of them, the Hudson River trip, although it's sort of the most domestic and the closer to home, is one of the greatest trips of my life. And I think that's because it happened very early in my marriage. My daughter was 1 year old. We were living in Beacon, New York. You know, I was a little antsy and I was teaching at the master's school. And my wife said to me, you know, you look like you need a project. And wife thought I needed a little adventure. So I looked out the window and saw the Hudson River. And I realized I'd never really been on it. So why don't I take an adventure on the Hudson? And my original idea, I'd been overseas. I'd been in Ecuador, and I had already written a book that was coming up for publication. But I was so excited to be able to do an adventure close to home, because that way I could get home if I needed to. I could be close to home, but I could also have one of the greatest adventures of my life. I didn't realize that the river ran, 315 miles all the way from Lake Tier of the Clouds on Mount Marcy through rapids and dams and locks and tides all the way down to Manhattan. And so I think it was the curiosity and the exploration of the river that excited me, and also getting out of the house for 3 weeks. I figured I could probably do it for 3 weeks, And my wife said, "Look, I'll give you a month, but you really, I got to have a mother's helper, and you got a month. That's it,
Well, and so, as you pointed out, a month was like was a 12th of your daughter's life.
Yeah, it was a huge chunk of her life, and that proved to be a little complex because she needed me more than I realized. Pete Seeger lived in Beacon, and I remember him telling me before I left, he said, don't do what I did, make sure you stay home as much as possible. Don't travel too much. But here I go on another adventure, the first of her life, seeing her dad disappear. And so I originally wanted to go from Manhattan to Lake Tier because I thought the idea was metaphorically great, because you could go from this sort of maw of industrial civilization to this beautiful, pristine lake. I had been to the Adirondacks in Tupper Lake area all my life, and I wanted to aim for that beauty. But when I started talking to people, and I realized I could easily paddle the first 154 miles to the Troy Dam because it's all tides, and you can take the flood tide going north on the river that flows two ways. But that if the river starts to get a little, it has a current, and then there's whitewater, and it gets to be a real problem. So I changed directions and wanted to take one craft, one canoe, and hired a guide for the upper whitewater section that I had to learn about, knew nothing about.
This is Ernie.
Yeah, Ernie LaPrairie was my guide, a wonderful rafter and Adirondack guide up in Blue Mountain Lake, and he helped me get through the whitewater, and then I was alone from Lake Luzerne all the way down to Manhattan. And again, coming home after 2.5 weeks was one of the great experiences of my life. Also, because when I got home, I wanted to surprise my family and didn't tell Melissa I was coming that day. I told her I was coming the next day, and I paddled from Poughkeepsie early in the morning at about 6 a.m. I left Poughkeepsie and got up to the Beacon Dock and grabbed my paddles and cameras and went up to the house and opened the door. And when I walked in, I felt like a thief. I felt like I'd been away 1,000 years and like I didn't belong there anymore. And I opened the door and I walked in, and I could hear Susanna babbling on a hot summer day, and she was stuck in her playpen and not exactly happy about that. And I walked around the corner, and she saw me and hadn't seen me in, I think, 1/24 of her life, one huge chunk. And she looked at me, she looked down, and she wouldn't acknowledge I was there. I mean, she was punishing me. And then she raised her hand, and I picked her up, and then she, put her head in my neck and said, "Dad, Dad, Dad, Dad." And it was just wonderful coming home. I spent a night there, and then I had to get 3 more days to get to Manhattan. So nobody had ever really done this trip before. A lot of people talk about it. A lot of people want to take a trip down the Hudson. In fact, recently, when the New York Times Book Review podcast came out, and Greg Coles was talking about, one of the editors was talking about my book. He was reading it in research for Riverman by another author. He says he always wanted to do the whole Hudson. So it's a thing. People want to travel the whole Hudson. But I didn't do it for the novel feat. I did it because I really just wanted to explore the history and learn all about the place, and also have an adventure close to home.
It sounds like this trip that took place 3.5 decades ago is still pretty fresh in your mind.
It's fresh because I did school programs for 30 years, and it formed the basis for my one-man show. It's kind of like a swimming to Cambodia. I mean, there are probably people listening to this show who heard me in the fourth grade, since the fourth grade was, is when they study the Hudson River in New York State and local history, so to speak. I was brought into the fourth grade and the seventh grade, and I did programs for 30 years. I must have talked to 1 million kids. And what happened was, when the publisher of the children's book, which came out first, decided they wanted to send me into schools, they sent a letter out to the up and down the river and said, "Peter would love to come into your school and talk about his adventure." Well, I'd never done that before, but I got a carousel of slides, and I went in and I developed this program, which I'd been doing. I did really up until the pandemic.
When you think about 30 or 35 years, you just mentioned the carousel of slides, which is something that, I think if we talked to some fourth graders today, they would have no idea what we're talking about. But 30 or 35 years is just a blip in the history of the Hudson River. But to read this book and read about your adventure in 2024, in some ways, it feels like visiting a completely different period in history.
Yeah, it was even then it was like stepping back into history, because I took a fascination for all the logging and the brick making along the Newburgh area and the ice, the industry. I took a fascination, and I was fascinated with talking with local people and historians about the river. So in a way, you enter by paddling this river from the beginning to the end, you enter all these mini histories along the way, and you discover different time periods of the river And now, 35 years ago, it does feel like history, but it feels so alive. And that's the curious thing about the Hudson for me is that of all my adventures, this one seems to live with me the longest. And Syracuse University has kept this book, River of Mountains, in print since 95. And it's wonderful to be with the university press. It's wonderful to be local, and it's wonderful to see the depth of history along the river.
The Hudson, at least the part from its source to the point south of Glens Falls, where it widens out and navigation is much easier. At least in the period where you write this, it felt like you were almost an explorer. I mean, not that there weren't people that knew the river, but it was a much less well known part of the Hudson River. Do you think that's changed in 30 or 35 years?
No, actually, I don't. It's amazing how little people really know about the whole river. And the great thing about this journey was that I felt like I could explore the whole thing and tie it together in some ways. And to me, maybe that's the writer in me, but the desire to communicate a whole, and so it's made up of many parts and many people, but it has a kind of an integrity to it that I was able to explore.
Well, I think the other thing that hits you when you read this book is that it's not just an adventure story. You really are kind of introducing us to the characters who really characterize the various parts of the river. I mean, I was really struck by the culture of the lock keepers in the Glens Falls area, for example, and the people who work the garnet mines, and it was interesting to discover that these each had kind of their own distinctive culture and history to them.
Well, that's a really good question and a really good point because what makes adventuring so exciting and the reason I've enjoyed teaching adventure writing and digital storytelling at Middlebury College and various University of Vermont and various places is the people. It's really getting students excited about a mentor when they're doing a project. But in this case, I'm meeting mentors all the way along. The whole Barton Garnet mines. I was just back there talking with Ernie LaPrairie 35 years later, talking to Peter Barton, who I had met on the river back in 1990, and that's the biggest garnet mine in the world, and who knows about that? There's a whole thing that's going on in North River that's fascinating, and then you get down, like you said, you get down to the locks and the lock tenders, and there was, I don't think that culture has the kind of integrity that it once had, where people pass those jobs on the way miners pass on jobs from generation to generation. That kind of has gone by the wayside, I think. But there is a kind of a world that exists, and I was able to meet tugboat captains and lock tenders and people, and really do some serious discussion with them and find out what they knew. A lot of that is past.
And with the locks, it sounds like it was in the process of going by the wayside even as you were taking that trip.
One of the fun things about thinking about retraveling the Hudson in the opposite direction, in this case, I'm going to actually do it, and I'm not going to paddle the whole way, but because I'm an elderly gent, it'll be the trip of an elderly fella. But so I'll be able to travel in different forms of traveling, because it's not about a feat and accomplishing a great, I'm the first to do it, but it's about seeing it again. And one of the great things about going back is seeing that canal, the feeder canal, the little 7-mile canal, has been rejuvenated. There's parks, people are walking around. There's parks all up and down the lower river, Parks and Rec and Scenic Hudson, and people have done an incredible job. I go back to Beacon where I was, and I can't believe that the old industrial area of the Nabisco plant is now park, and people are renting kayaks. It has this sort of magic quality of being something almost reborn and rejuvenated. It's fantastic.
How did both the trip itself and also the process of writing about it, both the children's book and this adult travel log, how did it shape everything that came after? Do you feel like you learned something about the work of doing this that has shaped everything that's come since?
That's a great question, because really I did learn from this trip that who you meet along the way, and not just the help they give you, but the information and the honesty and the willingness to share their stories is what makes, I think, everything I did subsequently exciting. Whether I was in the Arctic or Africa or Latin America or the jungle, it was all about the people. And this story is really about the people along the way. They're all so wonderful, and some of them not so wonderful. But I traveled up the Missouri River with William Least-Heat-Moon when he was writing his book River Horse, and you realize that all the rivers are full of stories and history, but the stories of people. And I like to tell that history through the stories of people. And I think that's what I really learned from this trip. And then I went on to many other adventures, and they came really out of this experience. Also, I think, like I wrote in the book, that when you're in a canoe or you're in some slow boat, you work your way somewhere, and then people are kind of, wow, let me talk to you. You just did some hard work, and they give you a hand, and it's kind of wonderful.
One of the things that amazes me is that this all took place before the internet, really. I mean, it was like very early stages of email in those days, but certainly you did the research for this in a pre-internet world, and yet the news of your trip spread ahead of you on the river to the degree that there's this wonderful scene where you pull your canoe over to the side and you walk into the closest building, and it turns out to be a place where they make false teeth, and they had all heard of you.
Yeah, you're right. I just went back to that area and met a guy named Fritzy who heard of me, and I gave him a copy of the book, and I'm hoping to camp there right where the Northway goes across. And I couldn't believe that he remembered the whole story and everything. Yeah, it's amazing how the story of my trip kind of traveled, and those people, the bishops, I think are gone. I just went back there at the beginning of the feeder canal, and their building's not there. So I don't know if they still have the business, but I'm going to look into that.
Well, and the other thing that hits you is that the girl who you're holding in the picture on the last page of this book is now an adventurer herself.
Yeah, Susanna is amazing, and I just hope I didn't over promote myself as an adventurer, because I'm terrified of that stuff. I'm, bungee jumping, no way, no thank you. I went up last year. I drove from Tucson in a snowstorm and got to Ouray, and she took me out, and I could go up maybe 20 feet, and then I try to back off, and then I go up another 20 feet, and I come back. Finally, on the third 20-foot climb of the baby hill, the baby cliff, I just decided it wasn't for me. So she's far more adventurous, but she has this image, I think, of her dad as being a little braver than he is.
The 30th anniversary edition of Peter Lowry's book, River of Mountains, is out from Syracuse University Press. Lowry, who now lives in Vermont, is planning the reverse trip up the Hudson, but using multiple means to go upstream. Keep listening. We'll take a quick break and then meet a Canton native now pursuing a Nashville music career, but also returning to his musical roots in the North Country. This is Northwards from North Country Public Radio.
Northwards on NCPR is supported by Claxton Hepburn Medical Center, offering a comprehensive range of cancer-fighting therapies at the Richard E. Winter Cancer Center, claxtonhepburn.org. And by the Book Nook, an independent bookstore located on Broadway in Saranac Lake, on Facebook at SL Book Nook. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.
More of Northwards now. I'm Mitch Tyke. For some of us, it takes a good long while before we appreciate how our parents' interests influence the things that we do as adults. But others figure it out pretty early. Kyle Tupper grew up in Canton. His dad was a drummer when he was young. In fact, if you've been to a bar or festival in the North Country in the past 40 years, you've probably heard the band that his dad played with for a decade, the band called Double Axle. Kyle thought that was pretty cool. Cool enough that he has pursued music for practically his whole life. At high school in Canton, at the Crane School of Music in Potsdam, and as a music teacher at schools in St. Lawrence County, and now as a full-time Nashville musician. Well, he's in Nashville only part-time, which we'll explain in a few minutes. But the really cool part is that his latest musical release is a cover of a song by Double Axel, one that his dad originally played on. Kyle Tupper joins us on the line from Bloomington, Indiana. Hello there. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
So I was hoping we could start with a story you shared online a few weeks ago that first caught my attention anyway. How or maybe why did you come to record a song that was first written and performed, back in the 1980s by the band Double Axel?
Yeah, so my dad was the third drummer over the tenure of the group Double Axel, and they're still playing today. So after Dad left, they went to a three-piece, but and Alex, who used to play keyboards full time in the group, and multi-instrumentalist, great guy. But Dad played back in, I think it was like 84 to 94, I think was the time that he played there. And right when he joined the band, they were working on the album Lovers Never Win. And so he played drums and sang background vocals on pretty much all the songs. And he had the opportunity to collaborate with Alex and write lyrics and work on the song I Need You Now, which was one of my favorite songs because, as a 8-year-old kid hearing your dad on this vinyl record, which how many of us really know what those things are anymore? Dad, being a musician, had the big speakers and everything. So I was very spoiled growing up listening to great music all the time. And then he would pop out, and I was in this band, and he put the record on. And he's like, I sang this song. And I was hooked. Right then, I was like, man, that is such a great song. And then he made a cassette tape from the stereo. Made a cassette tape. And I wore that thing out. I'd get to the end of that song, and I would just rewind it and go through my little boombox that I had at the time. And I just was like, man, this is such a great song. And so that was like the pivotal moment for me. And I do believe it was around 8 or 9 years old when I heard the song for the first time. And I was like, wow, there's this caliber of musicianship right here in our own backyard, and this great band, and my dad was in it. How cool was that? And so the song has always been in the back of my mind, and it's usually the first thing I show other people when they say, oh, your dad's a musician too. It's like, oh, yeah. And like I have it now in MP3s and WAV files. So I'll just pop it. It's always on my phone. I'll pop it up. And, wow, when was this recorded? It's like, yeah, back in 84. Oh, that's him singing? Yeah, wow, that's incredible. So like, where'd they do that? Oh, they had like a little barn studio on Judson Street Road out in Canton, New York. Never heard of it. It's like, well, you probably wouldn't. But yeah, that's pretty much the story, and it's always been a great song in my mind, and I just always loved the way he sang it. We would listen to music all the time together, and so that was one of the first songs that he showed me of him on a record, and I just thought it was so cool. I was just so proud to know that my dad was in this great band, and they're still a great band, and they're still performing all over the North Country and doing great things. But yeah.
Well, it answers the backstory, but when did the idea to re-record it in 2023 or 2024 come along? And how did you set about, like, what was the let's be heady here and say artistic vision for the new version?
Well, okay, so it kind of ties along with my move to Nashville. My wife and I moved to Franklin, Tennessee back in 2018. I remember it vividly, actually. I was sitting on the back patio with a cup of coffee. I think it might have been around 8 or 9 o'clock in the morning. And at that time, I had been working through some online courses on how to record music. And it's always been a passion of mine, something I've always loved doing and wanted to get really good at. And I thought at that moment, I was like, man, wouldn't it be cool to like re-record all of these songs that inspired me to really do the whole musician thing. And it was kind of like my homage to this great group that I revere so much. And I remember calling a couple of them. I think I called Rob Zollner, who did a lot of the production on this, and I remember talking to Dad as well. I was like, do you think this is too cheesy? What do you think? He's like, I think that'd be a great idea. And the other guys were just chuffed about it too, and so supportive of it. They're like my musical uncles, It's just like I look up to them, and I wanted to get their like okay before I did it type of thing. But that was in 2020, so it's like pre-pandemic, like right before the pandemic hit, and I'm working through, how to record at home, how to do things. I've done a couple of things before, but how do I take it from being like this amateur recording thing to this professional level, which is where I've always wanted to be. And weirdly enough, the pandemic hit at a perfect time where I could really learn the craft, right? And so I went into this whole deep dive of getting really good studio quality recordings right at home for inexpensive rates, and it just snowballed into that. And then I kind of just put it on the shelf for 3 years, really. And because right around that time, my wife then got accepted into Indiana University she's also a musician, fabulous musician, and she's getting her doctorate in wind band conducting. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah.
But so she got that. Her assistantship came through and a full scholarship to IU. And so that kind of put this whole project on the back burner. And so I've just kind of, I don't know if it's been some sort of lightning bolt that just hit me and said, Eureka, just get over yourself and start putting this stuff out. And it was incredible to just see the response, not only like for people like you, but from folks all over New York State and other areas in the country, and then just seeing how it really was a part of other people's lives. It's so cool to see how it's just snowballed into that. And I was like, man, that was really cool. And then that whole process of just learning how to record and wanting to kind of just keep their music alive. It's just like my way of saying this is what inspired me as a musician. If it's the one little thing I can do to keep the music of the North Country alive, then I'm going to do it.
I spent a fair amount of time trying to track down the original double axle recording of the song. Yeah. But while I found, some listings for the vinyl online, I have not actually been able to hear it. How would you describe how the original version compares to what you recorded?
I'd say it's about maybe 60-40 to the original. And I might be a hair slower. The key's different. Dad sang it in D. I dropped it down to C. Just vocally, it felt a little bit better. The arrangement as a whole is 100% true to the song in terms of verse, chorus, guitar solo. But I changed a couple of chords to, spice it up and everything. A lot of my background comes from learning jazz voicings and playing piano that way. And it was just something like, okay, I like these chords, but how, I want to stay true to the song, but I'll add a little bit of me.
But it does have it has a really nice 80s vibe to it, too.
Yeah. So I was kind of going, there's this whole movement of this genre called synthwave / retro wave, where people are really coming back to those synth sounds of the 80s, the reverbs, the guitar solos. It's really coming back in vogue, and for me, that's great, because I love that stuff.
I need to tell you that the sun is shining. What I need is you. I need you near me, 'cause it's almost morning. I need to tell you, you're my dream come true.
I sang it pretty close to the way Dad sang it, and just a couple of different inflections, but it's pretty much note for note the way he sang it. Vibe and feel is a little bit different. It's kind of cool to be like, okay, just naturally I'd play a drum fill that Dad played the exact same drum fill 40 some years ago. Most people are like, I want to sound like Michael Jackson, or I want to sound, like nowadays like Billie Eilish, or like people are emulating their voices. I was like, well, I wanted to sound like my dad, and I wanted to sound like Alex, I wanted to sound like Rob, because those were the voices I heard on a weekly basis. So it was weird. I grew up in a time where that was the music I was listening to compared to what was hip on the radio, in the late 90s and early 2000s, which was all alt rock, and Dave Matthews Band was huge, and John Mayer, people were trying to have that kind of like edgier sound, but I was listening to 80s rock and roll and the music that Dad was showing me.
There are a lot of kids that grow up with music in their lives, even if their dad isn't a professional musician, but with music around them. But they don't all go on to become professional musicians. So
right.
Like what did that journey look like for you?
Dad wasn't really playing professionally when I was growing up. He left Double Axle when I was so young, just to kind of be involved with what was going on in my life and my younger sister Stephanie. But it was really cool to to go to school. I went to Hugh C. Williams, Canton Central, and graduated in 2007. And it was just really cool to be able to be a part of the band program and have teachers that were like teaching me the legit way, reading music and all that stuff that Dad didn't know how to do. He was always a play-by-ear kind of guy. And he also graduated from Canton, too. So back in 71, I think, is when he graduated. And so it was always cool, you kind of walk in the same halls that Dad walked in the same band room where he kind of learned how to play until he decided he didn't want to do the band thing and wanted to be in rock and roll bands. But it was more so of me being interested in the things that he did when he was in high school, and knowing that he had documentation and recordings of the things that he did. So he didn't just have recordings of him playing with double axle. He had things of when he played with the Flying Wedge, and when he played with Fatty Lumpkin and the Spencer Davis Group, and I mean all of these. There are so many great musicians in the North Country still, and it was huge because it got me thinking about how I wanted to play not only in school but outside of school. Like I remember, like one of my dreams was like playing a prom. I want to be able to play a prom one day. And I did it, of course, and it was kind of anticlimactic, but it was just something that I didn't really know what it was all about, but I would learn by osmosis and just listening to stories pretty much every Saturday. I mean, a big part of my music education was, I call it the Saturdays with Dad, and it was exactly that. I just wanted to listen to a record, something new I hadn't heard before, and he would pull something out, and, oh yeah, Fleetwood Mac, they came through town back in 1971. I remember being in like the third row. Huey Lewis and the News, yeah, they came through before they were huge and everything. And you're like, wow, these bands came through St. Lawrence University in Clarkson, and they performed at Appleton Arena? Like, really? So it sparked my fire and the fuel to do that whole thing. And then I'd go to school and work with a great musician like Tim Savage, who was instrumental, literally, and in my growth as a musician, and saw that at an early age. And Larry Bakura, who was also a great drummer. I think like all the stars aligned, Mitch, really. It just was... Like I had the natural drive, and I had stories, and I had this great rock band legend with all four of them that were there to support me in whatever I wanted to do. And then I was getting a classical musical education as well, and then I learned about this place called the Crane School of Music when I was in 6th grade. Because I went to Catholic school. I went to St. Mary's, and at that time they didn't have a music program. They would have the Crane School kids would come and teach us. And that was when I was like, you know what, this music school thing sounds pretty cool. So I knew at 6th grade that I wanted to go to the Crane School of Music and study with Jim Peterzak, who is a legend and another legend as a professor of percussion, and not only at the school, but at a country level. I mean, he changed the game of the Percussive Arts Society, and I got to learn from him back in the mid-2000s. And it was a string of just really fortunate events that have gotten me to where I am today. It's where we grow up. It's the people that we're involved with, and just how much they instill confidence in us and encourage us. So I was always encouraged. I was never told that you shouldn't be a musician. There's no money in it, or it's not a good career path. My parents saw right away that, hey, this kid loves singing. He loves playing. I don't know what'll happen with it. I mean, but let's just help him best we can, and teachers along the way, same thing. Just I never heard that there's a lot of competition. I never heard the negative side, because it's there, but I always just heard it's a dream, so follow that dream and go after it, and it really helped when adversity came later on in life. I was like, ooh, there is some challenges here. I'm no longer this big fish in a small pond. I'm a pretty average tuna in the ocean here.
Well, so let's go full circle before we wrap up. I mean, what do the guys from Double Axle think of this recording that this cover of their song from 40 years ago?
Yeah, I remember getting text messages from all of them. I think Alex he said, "Wonderful rendition, little brother. Love you." And I was just really happy to hear that. And of course, Dad called me up, and he was just so happy about it. And he just said, "Wow, of course, not surprised. You knocked it out of the park." And Frank was just like, "Wow, this is awesome." And Rob said to me, well, I guess I got to get working on the next one, because Rob actually played guitar on it. So that was really cool too. It was so great to be able to play everything, but I can't play guitar. And I was like, you know what? How cool would it be to have at least one of them play on it? Yeah. So they all loved it, and I was really, really humbled by that and honored to be able to share that with them. And I think that they were proud, and they were all smiling. They were all smiling. So I'm really happy about that.
Hopefully they'll wear out the cassette version.
Right? I'm going to have to make some cassettes and send them their way.
Kyle Tupper is a Canton native, Crane School graduate, and a former St. Lawrence County school music teacher who is now a professional musician, splitting his time between Nashville and Bloomington, Indiana, which is where we reached him. His latest recording is a song called I Need You Now, first recorded by the North Country band Double Axle. Back in the days, his dad played drums with the group. We're hearing that original recording now, and you can find a link to Kyle's version, not Taylor's version, ncpr.org/northwards. From a band called Double Axle to a guy who can do a double axle, we'll talk skating with a former Olympian when Northwards returns right after this.
Support for Northwards on North Country Public Radio comes from the Adirondack Fragrance Farm, presenting the Eclipse Fragrance Festival, offering a variety of activities April 5th through 8th. For complete event details, visit adkfragrancefarm.com. Your business or organization can sponsor Northwards or any of the programs on NCPR and reach listeners across the North Country. Find out how by emailing sponsorship@ncpr.org.
It's Northwards from North Country Public Radio. I'm Mitch Teich. My son has been skating since he was about 3 years old. Figure skating, that is. He picked it up because he would go along to his older sister's skating practices, and it turned out he was pretty good at it. So we were a little concerned when we moved here from Milwaukee. While there are lots of skaters in the North Country, there aren't that many coaches to go around. Fortunately, he's ended up working with a couple of coaches he likes and who work well with him. And then a few months ago, our local club announced another coach would be coming to help local skaters a few times a month for those who'd like some extra support. His name is Paul Wiley, and if that rings a bell, it's because Wiley was the Olympic silver medalist in 1992 and skated for a long while at figure skating's top level. It is not every small-town ice rink that has an Olympic medal winner working with skaters, but an increasing number of rinks in the North Country can claim that distinction. Paul Wiley, thanks for meeting me at 9:45 p.m. inside Pine Street Arena.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure. I've really enjoyed getting to know this part of the world. I'd never been to any of these rinks before, and there's quite a lot of the skating universe that lives here, which is neat.
Well, and I want to start there because, when you introduce yourself and your title is Olympic silver medalist, 1992, there are a lot of people who, after doing what you have done, could easily call it a career or could coach a handful of students in a big metropolitan area. And here we are talking in Potsdam, and you've done some work in Canton and in Norwood and maybe Messina and Ogdensburg.
Lake Placid.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
So what is it that makes you want to keep doing this, and at this kind of grassroots level where you might have been 50 years ago?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I really like to be a part of that process where you can see, somebody hook into the idea of what it takes to jump and rotate or spin faster, to have line on the ice, to interpret music. I don't know. I mean, I had people that were very helpful to me, and I happen to have really good coaches. And so I think that those fundamentals are such an important part of, what it takes to move to the next level. And unfortunately, if you don't have them, then it makes it very difficult to do the difficult things that, people are getting credit for these days. And the computer changed everything, right? And so now you have to have these. I mean, we're seeing quadruple axles, and we're seeing quadruple combinations, and so the fundamentals of learning how to jump and spin are even more important than they've ever been. But it's also important to remember that this is also an art, so it's both a sport and an art put together. So though there is, there are technical elements and grades of execution and, all of that technical piece of it, there is 50% relatively, which is the components, the program components, the artistic mark. And I think that a lot of times people forget that. But it's what I fell in love with, and it's the thing that I love about skating is that it is that combination that, trying to reach the audience with, these difficult moves, but choreographed into the program so that it makes it very exciting and engaging.
We're having this conversation, and maybe some of our listeners can hear music in the background with the ice show practice that's going on just through the wall behind you. But can you flash back to the thing that made you fall in love with skating when you were 3, 4, 5 years old?
Yeah, I mean, I think, so I was in Texas. We grew up in Dallas, and the only rink that we could skate in was the Fair Park Coliseum. And I had the Tonka trucks, and I'm like going around. And my sisters both skated, and they enabled me. My mom and dad enabled me to, skate, and got me a pair of skates. And I think it was this sense of freedom and just the very different feeling that you get when you're in a rink on the ice. You're going fast, you're stopping instantly, you're spinning, you're turning around. It's almost like you can do things there that you can't do anywhere else, right? And so I don't know, it's very exciting. And then the music piece of it came later. My first program that I competed with, and this is no lie, was dueling banjos. Because when you're from Dallas, you have to milk it. But you know what? I mean, I think that the music was such an important aspect of what I enjoyed about it was sort of taking something that that registered artistically, emotively, and then putting it together with this athletic piece was really, that was a fit for me. Other sports weren't necessarily. I don't have the best hand-eye coordination in the world.
and I can say this because I am in the same boat. Neither of us is a particularly tall man.
No, I am. I wouldn't even say I'm of average height. Right. But you get gifts in different ways, and I think that one of the most thrilling things was to be, either in a competition or on the road with Stars on Ice, or and you have a piece of music that you are sort of presenting for the first time, and it's a theme, or there's something about it that that is going to involve the audience, and it's exciting to be able to have that expression. It's very I don't know, it's part of being a human being. I think it's telling a story, right?
Well, can you elaborate a little on the music piece of it, because I'm a skating dad, and and you've worked with my son, and and I know every year there's a little bit of hand wringing that goes into figuring out what's the right music that not only is a good demonstration for skating, but also just feels right to him or whoever. Mm-hmm. How did that process play out for you? Was there somebody that flagged certain pieces of music, or were you always a music fan that kept your eyes out for a particular kind of music?
It was a mixture, because I can tell you that I used to buy, way too much music at Tower Records, and when you had when it was actually records,
when you could
and
go to a
record
CDs store, right? Yeah.
And you just you were boiling the ocean, literally. I think today it's a lot easier in some ways. I would listen and listen and listen, and there would be certain pieces that I would get excited listening to, and I would bring them to my coach, and who was my choreographer, Mary Scottwold, and we would sit there usually in her car, because I would sort of boil it down to like 4 or 5 pieces. And I'll never forget bringing her Carl Orff's Carmina Burana, right? And obviously everybody knows that piece of music, but nobody had really skated to it. And there's a reason for that, because it's scary, right? And
It's not Carmen.
right, yeah. I mean, it was in the Omen and things like that. But we were listening to it in her car, and she was wearing shorts, and I could see that it was like the hair was standing up on her legs, and so that was like, I think we have a winner. Because you're looking for that kind of reaction, right, from the audience, something visceral. And oftentimes you go to the story that you're telling, and then your program has dynamics, right? You can't possibly just go 100 miles an hour the whole entire time. You have to calm down, and then you have to have something that's very, big to come back. So, I mean, I think that there is that pacing that's very important. And Mary Scottwold, who was my choreographer for many years, just understood that. She got it instantly. And it was the gift that she gave me, was knowing exactly where we were going with it. And then she would go and edit it with, this professional editor, and it would, all I did was like listen to it and say, yeah, I like this. But then she put it together and made it sing for a 4-minute program or a 3.5 or 2.5 minute program.
Well, and that goes back to the storytelling you were telling, and the idea that the music that you skate to really needs to have an arc.
Yeah, exactly. So, you start off with something that draws the audience in, that sort of explains who you are, usually that enables you to do the triple flip first, and then the triple axel second. All right. So there's a lot of tension that has to be resolved. And then, then you're kind of off to what's next, which is sort of fitting the rhythmic piece, or you might be setting up something. I skated through Apollo 13, and I was able to work with these fantastic lighting designers with Stars on Ice, and people that were Tony Award-winning folks. And I'll never forget, like, I had this, at the very beginning of the Apollo 13, I had the jumps, but then there was this moment where I sort of skated around and around and around, and that was me taking off, right? And so the lighting designer made it look like the bottom of the rocket, those kind of colors, the center of the rink lit up that way. And there was just something about it that maybe it made more sense to me, but I felt like it also made sense to the audience. And so anyway, those were the kinds of things that I loved, that I got a chance to do later on with the shows. And I think skating shows are a really fun thing to do. I'm glad your son's doing it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. So I mean, they're out there practicing right now, and they're not going to work with a professional lighting designer. They're going to work with a couple of volunteers who are running the spotlights.
Nor did I. Right? Yeah. Exactly. Right.
So, what do you hope that you're able to impart? Aside from the fundamentals, but is there something, some bigger picture that you're hoping to impart on, kids that you're working with for 20 or 25 minutes at a time?
Yeah, I mean, hopefully a love of skating that they can latch onto and develop, because I think if you can make it intrinsic, that this thing becomes something that you really enjoy doing and you can't explain why, then I think the sky's the limit.
So what do you think, what should a skater's relationship with falling be?
So I think you have to always remember that if you're going to take a risk, that risk could pay off. And when it does pay off, it's really very valuable, right? And so, and it's this discipline of trying to develop the muscle memory so that it does become automatic. And I think that that's the part what I try to instill to the student is, what we're looking to do is develop a vocabulary that then you use effortlessly. And so, if you've got your double jumps and we're working on your triple jumps so that you can pull them out at a moment's notice and, do 7 of them in a program and get a standing ovation, right? That's kind of what we're after.
One of my colleagues is going to laugh when he hears me make this metaphor, but it sounds like you're teaching them jazz.
Yeah. I mean, I would love to learn how to play jazz. I love jazz. But in a way, I there is improvisation to it, as I know there is in jazz. And there is a sense that you have to have the confidence to throw it out there and be wrong, but that you get a certain, you get certain things that you're able to do automatically, and then those become, your little riffs, right? And that's when it gets really fun.
So we mentioned my son out there,
Yeah.
and I don't know if you've noticed, but I suspect you have, that he is the only boy on the ice
Yes.
most nights in Potsdam.
Yeah, and that is how we all grew up, and I think that I had two older sisters, and sort of, I got dragged. I want to say dragged to the rink, because I said I begged.
That's how he ended up at the rink. So
right. I begged to do it. I had my my Tonka trucks and everything, but it is you find yourself an anomaly somehow, but there's something. I think what was really fun for me was the first time I went to a competition. And I was 9 years old, and there were 3 other guys that were there, and I was competing against them, and it was like, I wanted to play pinball, and I just hang out with them. And then I was like, oh, okay, wait, we got to do figures and free skate and, get this thing. We got to, vie for some medals here, But I think that that is something that happens later on, is that you wind up with camaraderie, and you get a chance to meet up with and train with and perform with other guys and gals, and they become your best friends, and so that's pretty exciting. But in general, you are a minority in this sport as a guy, and in a rink, it has its advantages sometimes. Right?
Yes, as we were having this conversation, Charlie came in here and left with his girlfriend.
Yes,
so.
right, yeah. So it is. It can be really fun. It's a fun place to grow up.
When you go to a place like Potsdam,
Yeah.
and you see the level of interest, I mean, it amazed me when we moved here how many skating clubs there are in the North Country,
Yes.
in towns the size of Potsdam and much smaller than Potsdam,
Yes.
Norwood and Lake Placid and others.
Ogdensburg,
which is a little bigger than Potsdam.
Right.
But do you take some inspiration from the idea that skating is alive and well around the country in the way that it is?
I love seeing it. I love seeing the spring shows, and seeing the kids get excited about being together, doing something, and learning here you guys do ice dancing, you do moves in the field, there's a precision team, there's not precision, synchro now,
yes, that's all
sorry. And we see, you're seeing aspects of the sport in a pretty small universe, and I think that's neat. I think it's neat to see it. I think I love seeing the grassroots, and I'm energized by trying to help, to try to bring kids along, and to see them develop correct technique and a passion for the sport. And like I said, once you get somebody to love something intrinsically, then I think they're going to want to be they're excited to improve, and that can be, that's the reward in itself.
Well, Paul Wiley, thank you for helping us understand that,
Mitch.
and thank you for everything you do.
Yeah, absolutely.
Paul Wiley won the silver medal in men's figure skating at the 1992 Winter Olympics in Albertville, France. These days, he is coaching skaters where he lives in Lake Placid and in other North Country towns and villages, including Ogdensburg, Messina, and Potsdam, where I spoke with him at the Pine Street Arena. We'll do a hockey stop now and bring this edition of Northwards to an end, spraying ice all over the people who bring it to you. Digital oversight of the show comes from Ethan Shanty and Bill Hanel. Caitlin Kelly does our social media. Doyle Dean shoots video. Our theme music is by the Wickmore Jazz Trio of Plattsburgh. And I'm Mitch Teich, your host and producer. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the Northwards podcast and get new interviews delivered to you every week on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, or maybe even your toaster. Have a great weekend and keep listening. Here and Now, Science Friday, and The Beat Authority are all on the way here on NCPR.